When we speak of the empath and the narcissist, we are not speaking merely of two personalities colliding in the social world. We are speaking of archetypes. We are speaking of two ancient forces that meet again and again in the theater of human relationships, each one carrying within it the resonance of millennia, each one echoing through myth, religion, and the hidden language of dreams. The empath is not simply the one who feels too much. The empath is a vessel of eros, the connective principle, the one who hears the subtle tones of another soul's music and responds with tenderness. And the narcissist is not merely selfishness embodied, but an image of the wounded Apollo, trapped before the pool of his own reflection, unable to see beyond the shimmering surface of himself. When they meet, a sacred and dangerous dance begins, and the outcome of that dance determines whether life itself is renewed or whether both souls are devoured by shadow. I want you to see this not as a clinical dynamic, though the language of psychology can describe it in terms of trauma, codependence, and personality disorders. Rather, I want you to see it as a mystery enacted in the depths of the collective unconscious. Every empath carries within them the archetype of the healer, the wounded Christ, the bodhisattva who cannot pass through the gates of liberation while others remain in chains. Every narcissist embodies the archetype of the wounded child who has built walls of illusion so thick that the only way to survive was to enthrone the false self in the temple of their heart. One carries too much responsibility, the other flees from responsibility altogether. One bleeds for others, the other drains others to avoid their own bleeding. Together, they form a psychic alchemy whose fire is either transformative or destructive. But let us ask, what happens when the empath withdraws, when the empath refuses to save? What happens when the endless well of compassion dries up, when the hands that always reached out fall back into stillness? This moment, my friends, is not only a psychological turning point, but a metaphysical event, for it is the moment when an archetypal pattern, repeated countless times in history, is interrupted. And when archetypes are interrupted, something shakes in the very foundation of the psyche. The dream changes, the soul awakens. To save the narcissist has been the empath's unconscious mission. It is a silent bargain. If I love enough, if I bleed enough, if I dissolve myself into your wounds, then perhaps your reflection will crack and the real child hidden beneath will emerge. This is the logic of the savior complex. But it is also the logic of the shadow, for beneath this noble gesture lies a hidden truth. The empath is trying to save the narcissist in order to avoid facing their own abyss. They believe that by redeeming the other, they will redeem themselves. But when the empath finally stops, when they let the narcissist face the cold waters of their own reflection alone, the spell is broken. The empath is forced to confront that it was never the other they were trying to save. It was always themselves. Do you see the danger? Do you see the trembling here? The empath has lived like a candle burning at both ends, always extending light into the cavern of another's night. But when the flame is withdrawn, the darkness comes rushing in, not only for the narcissist, but for the empaths themselves. For the first time, they are left alone with their own shadow. And here, Jung's warning resounds like a tolling bell. The withdrawal of projection is always the most dangerous stage of individuation. To stop saving the narcissist is to pull back a projection that has been carrying the weight of one's own soul. Suddenly, the empath must face the truth of their own wound, the secret wish to be seen, to be valued, to be saved. And what of the narcissist when the empath no longer saves them? Imagine a dream in which a man stands before a mirror that no longer reflects him. He bangs against the glass, he shouts, he weeps, but there is only emptiness. That is the narcissist's inner life. When deprived of the empath's gaze, they depended upon the other's reflection to confirm their false self, to feed the image that kept the inner child silent. Without that constant stream of attention, the cracks in the facade begin to widen. Rage may pour out like lava. Despair may rise like a flood. The narcissist is thrown into the confrontation with their own abyss, and here too the danger is immense. For many will double down on the illusion, seeking new mirrors, new empaths, new fuel to avoid the terrifying sight of their own inner void. But some, in rare cases, will finally fall through the mirror and meet the abandoned child within, and in that meeting lies the possibility of healing. But do not mistake me. I am not here to preach that the empath must continue saving until such a miracle occurs. Quite the opposite. I am telling you that the soul's integrity demands the cessation of this pattern, because the empath's sacrifice, while noble in appearance, is often another form of avoidance. It is easier to suffer for another than to descend into one's own depths. It is easier to bleed outward than to face the wound within. And so the empath repeats the cycle, binding themselves in chains of light that are, in truth, woven of shadow. Now I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Not literally, but inwardly. Imagine you are standing in a dark forest. Before you is a child, trembling, abandoned, cold. You feel the instinct to rush forward, to wrap this child in your arms, to heal them, to whisper that they are not alone. But then you see the child's face is your own. This is the moment when the empath stops saving the narcissist. This is the moment when projection collapses and the true work begins, because the narcissist's wound was only ever a mirror of your own. The unloved child in them resonated with the unloved child in you. Their demand for devotion echoed your hunger to give so that you might feel worthy. Their emptiness spoke to your fullness, but also to your secret emptiness beneath the fullness. And in this recognition, Jung would say, the shadow is unveiled. This is why it feels like death when the empath withdraws. Something ancient dies. Argot dies, an archetype is slain, the Savior dies in order that the self may live. And death, as always, is the threshold of transformation. In alchemy, This is the nigredo, the blackening, the decomposition of old forms so that a new essence might be distilled. The empath enters the night sea journey, descending into waters that are no longer someone else's but their own, and in that descent, the possibility of rebirth emerges. Yet let us not romanticize this moment. It is not a gentle awakening. It is not a soft dawning of light. It is, more often, a tearing apart, dreams of drowning, of being swallowed by the earth, of endless corridors. With no exit, these appear to the empath who withdraws. Their psyche, long accustomed to externalizing the wound, now floods with images of inner chaos. They may feel abandoned, worthless, consumed by guilt for not saving, or haunted by rage at their own years of sacrifice. This is the purgatorial stage, the place where the ego trembles, where the unconscious pours forth images like volcanic ash. But in this chaos lies the material of individuation, for only when the wound is seen within can the healing become real. And what of Jung's warning? It is this: if the empath does not embrace this descent, if they merely withdraw from the narcissist, but do not confront their own shadow, they risk becoming hardened, bitter, cynical. They risk transforming into a different mask of the same archetype. They may swing from savior to persecutor, from martyr to judge, from the bleeding heart to the stone heart. And in that swing, the archetype remains untransformed. The cycle will repeat again with new faces, new mirrors, new dramas. This is the danger of stopping without descending. The only true liberation lies in entering the darkness that was always projected outward. Therefore, my friends, what happens when the empath no longer saves the narcissist is not a simple liberation. It is the opening of a door that leads into the underworld of the soul. And Jung would tell us, it is there, in that underworld, where the gold of the self lies hidden, for only in facing the wound directly, without projection, can the archetype dissolve and the true self emerge. Let us wander deeper into the mystery. When projection collapses and the empath no longer pours their lifeblood into the wounds of the narcissist, the unconscious begins to compensate. In images, dreams erupt, and these dreams, if attended to, reveal the hidden story that has been enacted all along. One empath I once counseled dreamt of carrying a bucket of water to a parched desert where a man cried out for relief. Each time she poured the water into his mouth, the desert floor cracked and swallowed it whole. At last, exhausted, she looked into the bucket and saw her own reflection staring back at her. This is the psychic image of what occurs when the soul realizes it has been offering its essence into a void that cannot receive. The dream is not condemnation, it is revelation. It tells us, the thirst you thought belonged to the other was, in truth, your own. We cannot underestimate how powerful the savior archetype is. In myth, it takes the form of Christ, of Prometheus, of the healer, who descends into Hades to retrieve the lost soul. But when this archetype is distorted by shadow, it binds the empaths into compulsive sacrifice. They are driven, often unconsciously, to redeem what cannot be redeemed, to heal what does not wish to be healed. And this compulsion is not born of love, but of fear. Fear of facing the abyss within, fear of meeting the unloved self. Thus, the empath becomes the redeemer of others precisely to avoid redeeming themselves. Jung would say, when the archetype is unconscious, it possessus. Only when it is made conscious can it be transformed. Notice then what occurs when the empath withdraws. The archetype rises into consciousness like a god stripped of its mask. Suddenly, the empath is no longer simply helping or loving. They are confronted with a reality that their saving was a projection, an image placed upon the other, and in this moment of collapse, they feel a terror akin to death. It is the death of illusion, the death of the false mission, the death of the archetype's possession, and yet, in this death lies the possibility of freedom, for when the archetype is no longer acted out externally, it can be integrated internally. The empath can recognize that the savior they sought to be for the narcissist must now be directed toward themselves. This is where myth can guide us. Consider Orpheus, who descended into the underworld to retrieve Eurydice. He was told not to look back, but his longing, his doubt, caused him to turn, and she was lost. This story is the eternal drama of the empath, descending into another's darkness, trying to lead them back to the light, but losing them because the descent was not theirs. When the empath finally refuses to descend, it is as if Orpheus turns not outward, but inward. Instead of seeking Eurydice in another, he realizes that Eurydice is his own soul, waiting to be restored. Thus, the myth is inverted, and the empath begins the true descent, the descent into their own shadow, where the lost soul of the self is waiting. The narcissist, too, is caught in a myth. Narcissus, staring into the pool, falls in love with his reflection, unable to turn away. But let us not forget, beneath that myth lies a wound. Narcissus is not in love with himself. He is captivated by the image of love he never received. His reflection is the phantom of a mother's gaze that was absent, inconsistent, or conditional. Thus, he clings to the surface, terrified to dive into the water where the true self lies submerged. The empath has been the water, shimmering, reflecting, sustaining his illusion. When the empath withdraws, the pool dries, and Narcissus is left staring into emptiness. This is a catastrophe for the false self, but it is also an opportunity for the true self to stir beneath the surface. But here is Jung's warning again. Most will not dive. Most will seek another pool, another empath, another shimmering reflection, because to dive is to die. and death of the false self is the most feared of all deaths. And yet, if by some grace the narcissist dares to face the void, they may encounter the abandoned child within, the archetype of the poor eternus, the eternal youth, crying out for the love that was denied. To meet this child is to begin the long, painful work of healing, but such healing is rare, and it is not the empath task to force it, for the empath's task is to turn back toward their own soul. Let us linger for a moment on the empath's descent. What does it look like to face the shadow directly? Often it begins with rage. Rage at the narcissist for taking so much, rage at oneself for giving so much, rage at God for allowing such suffering. This rage is frightening, for the empath has long disowned it, preferring to cloak themselves in sweetness and light. But rage, when made conscious, is not evil. It is the energy of violated boundaries. It is the guardian at the gate of the soul. To feel this rage is to reclaim power, and once rage is integrated, grief follows. Grief for the years lost, for the self abandoned, for the illusions that sustained them. This grief is the baptism of the soul, the tears that wash away the savior mask. And beyond grief lies stillness, the quiet ground of being where the true self can emerge. I recall another dream shared by an empath who had broken free from the cycle. She dreamt of standing on a battlefield, littered with broken shields and swords. She dropped her own sword and knelt to the ground, pressing her hands into the soil. From beneath the earth, a golden root began to rise, wrapping around her arms, filling her body with warmth. This was the image of individuation, the end of battle, the return to the ground, the discovery of inner gold. The dream told her, your strength does not come from saving others. It comes from rooting yourself in the depths of your own being. And this is the heart of Jung's message. Individuation requires that we withdraw projections, that we cease saving others as a means of avoiding our own work. The empath who no longer saves the narcissist is forced into individuation. They must gather the scattered fragments of their soul, hidden in the other, and bring them home. They must face the shadow, embrace the inner child, and integrate the archetype of the Savior in a new, conscious way. Only then can they offer love that is not sacrifice, but abundance. Only then can they relate without compulsion, without the secret bargain of redemption. But beware again, the path is narrow, for the danger is always to swing into the opposite, to become hard, cynical, armored, to say, I will never give again. This is the voice of the shadow wearing a new mask. True individuation is not the death of compassion, but its transfiguration. The empath who has integrated the Savior archetype does not cease to care. They care more deeply, but with freedom. They can love without losing themselves. They can give without bleeding. They can see the narcissist not as a project to redeem, but as a fellow soul caught in the web of archetypes. And in that seeing, they are liberated. Now let me ask you to imagine one last image. You are standing before a mirror for years. This mirror reflected only others, their wounds, their needs, their shadows. But now, as you gaze into it, you see yourself not the mask, not the savior, not the rescuer, but the self that has always been waiting behind you. The shadows of old patterns fade before you. The path of individuation stretches into mystery, and you realize to stop saving the narcissist was never about abandoning them. It was about finally saving yourself. This is the paradox. In ceasing to play God for another, you finally allow God to be present in you. In refusing to rescue, you discover the ground of your own soul. And there, in that ground, lies the freedom that no narcissist, no archetype, no shadow can ever take away. When the empath ceases to save, when the ritual of sacrifice is broken, what follows is not peace, but the trembling of the psyche as it is torn from its old orbit. To stand without the narcissist's gravity is to float in a void, and in that void the archetypes roar like restless gods. For years, the empath's identity was bound to the redeemer role, the healer who absorbed wounds that were not theirs. Without this role, who are they? This is the danger Jung always spoke of. When the mask is stripped away, the ego trembles before the abyss of the self. It is here that individuation either begins or collapses. This collapse of the savior identity is not unlike the alchemical dissolution. In the vessel, substances are broken down until their form is unrecognizable, until the prima materia, the raw, chaotic substance of being emerges. The empath, no longer defined by saving, falls into this prima materia. They feel shapeless, formless, stripped of meaning. They ask, if I am not the rescuer, am I anything at all? Yet, it is precisely in this state of formlessness that the possibility of transformation arises. Out of the ashes of the savior complex, the phoenix of the true self can rise, but the unconscious is not gentle in its work. It speaks through dreams, through symptoms, through strange synchronicities that unsettle the waking mind. An empath might dream of wandering through endless corridors, searching for a door that never appears. This is the psyche's way of saying, you have left the familiar house of sacrifice, but you have not yet entered the new dwelling of wholeness. Or they may dream of drowning in oceans with no shore, for the waters of the unconscious are no longer held back by the dams of projection. These dreams are warnings and invitations. They say, go deeper, or you will be lost. And what of the narcissist left behind, stripped of the empath's gaze? They too encounter the archetype, no longer sustained by borrowed devotion. They face the hollow echo of their own false self. Some will rage, seeking desperately for another mirror, another source of supply. Others will collapse into despair, for without the reflection they are nothing, but a rare few will turn inward. Jung would remind us that even the narcissist carries the self within, waiting to be discovered. The loss of the empath may serve as the crisis that forces them to confront the inner child, the wounded one they abandoned long ago. But again, this is not the empath's task to ensure. It is not their destiny to shepherd another through the underworld. It is their task to descend themselves. Here, Jung's warning grows sharper. The empath who refuses their descent, who merely withdraws outwardly but does not turn inward, risks stagnation. They may become hardened, cynical, convinced that love is dangerous and compassion a trap. They may construct walls so thick that they resemble the very narcissist they once tried to heal. This is the irony of archetypal possession. If you do not integrate it consciously, it will shapeshift and seize you in another form. The savior who denies their own wound becomes the persecutor. The healer who refuses to heal themselves becomes the destroyer. Thus, Jung cautions us, the withdrawal of projection must always be followed by the integration of the shadow. Without this, the cycle repeats in new guises. What does integration look like? It looks like the empath facing the hidden motives beneath their sacrifice. They must ask, why did I give so much? Why did I bleed for one who never thanked me? Why did I feel most alive when someone else was drowning? These are uncomfortable questions, for the answers reveal that much of what appeared as love was, in truth, compulsion. The empath saved because they were terrified of their own abandonment. They healed others because they feared their own brokenness. They clung to suffering because it disguised their longing to be chosen, to be loved unconditionally. To face this is to shatter the illusion of nobility and see the shadow beneath. And yet, this shattering is the beginning of wholeness. Consider the image of the cross. The empath has lived crucified, nailed by their own hands, offering their body for the redemption of another. But when they step down from this cross, when they refuse to save, they discover something radical. Resurrection is not found in endless crucifixion. Resurrection is found in descending into the tomb of the self, facing the darkness within and rising anew. The Christ archetype itself teaches us this. The descent into death is necessary for true rebirth. And so, the empath must die to the false savior role in order to rise into the true self. I recall a dream told by a woman who had finally ended her cycle with a narcissistic partner. She dreamt of standing in a church where all the statues of saints crumbled into dust. Terrified, she looked at the altar, expecting to see it destroyed, but instead, a small flame burned in the darkness, steady and pure. This dream told her, the idols of false sacrifice must fall, but the inner flame, the self, remains. This flame cannot be extinguished by withdrawing from the narcissist. On the contrary, it is revealed only when the false statues collapse. But the empath often resists this inner turn, for it demands a loneliness. They fear to no longer save is to stand alone, stripped of the identity that gave them meaning. Yet, Jung reminds us, loneliness is the first step of individuation. To be alone is not to be abandoned. It is to stand before the self without distraction. The aloneness of the empath, when they stop saving, is the silence in which the self whispers, and in that whisper, a new life begins. The narcissist, meanwhile, may appear in the empath's dreams long after separation. This does not mean they are fated to return. It means the archetype still lives within. One man dreamt of his narcissistic father as a dragon guarding a cave. Each time he approached, the dragon roared and threatened to devour him. Finally, in one dream, he entered the cave despite the dragon's presence. Inside, he found not treasure, but a child, weeping in the dark. The dream revealed the truth. The narcissist was not the final enemy, but the guardian of the empath's own inner child. By refusing to confront the dragon, he had remained enslaved to the outer figure. By facing it, he reclaimed the child. This is how the archetype works. The outer figure is always the carrier of an inner truth. When we withdraw projection, the inner figure is revealed. Jung's warning, then, is not that we should fear this collapse, but that we should honor it as sacred. To stop saving the narcissist is to awaken a storm in the psyche, but storms are necessary to clear the air. It is the shaking of the foundation that reveals what is real. The empath who endures this storm without turning back will discover a wholeness they have never known. They will see that love need not be sacrifice, that compassion need not be bondage, that healing begins not in redeeming another, but in embracing the unloved self. And once they have touched this wholeness, they can love freely, not as savior and victim, but as soul to soul. What happens then when the empath survives the storm, when they refuse to collapse into bitterness, when they endure the loneliness of no longer saving? Slowly, the fragments of the self begin to gather. The archetype of the savior, once projected outward, begins to be integrated inward. No longer a compulsive rescuer, the empath discovers a new way of being, a way of love that is not sacrifice but presence. This is the true fruit of individuation. To embody compassion without being devoured by it, to hold space for another's suffering without abandoning one's own soul. The empath's wholeness is not a return to innocence, but a return through shadow. Having descended into the abyss, having faced the rage, the grief, the emptiness, they rise, not naive, but wise. Their compassion is no longer compulsive, but conscious. They can say no without guilt, yes without fear. They can see the narcissist not as a monster to be defeated, nor as a child to be saved, but as a human soul entangled in their own archetype. They can love without losing themselves, and they can walk away without hatred. This is liberation, the freedom to be oneself without the chains of projection. And yet, Jung's warning lingers, for even here, the archetypes never disappear. They remain as eternal forces in the collective unconscious, always ready to seize the unwary. The empath must remain vigilant, must tend the inner flame, lest they fall again into the old compulsion, because the narcissist will always appear in one form or another, in the dreams, in the relationships, in the culture at large. They are the mirror of a civilization obsessed with image, power, and illusion. To live in this world is to live surrounded by reflections, but the one who has integrated the shadow no longer confuses the reflection with the real. They see beyond the mask, beyond the image, into the archetypal dance beneath, and in seeing, they are no longer enslaved. For the narcissist, the absence of the empath is both catastrophe and chance. Catastrophe, because without the endless flow of devotion, their false self begins to crack. Chance, because only in this crack can the true self emerge. Most will run, seeking another empath to fill the void, but a rare few will face the abyss, and if they do, they too will begin the descent, the encounter with the inner child, the confrontation with the abandoned self, the painful integration of shadow. Whether they succeed is not the empath's concern, for each soul must walk their own path through the underworld. To try to carry another through it is to rob them of the very initiation that could save them. Thus, the empath's withdrawal is not cruelty, but necessity. It is the sacred refusal that honors both souls. In this, we see the paradox of archetypal relationships. They are not accidents, not random collisions of personalities. They are summons from the unconscious, invitations to awaken. The empath meets the narcissist because their own wound is calling. The narcissist meets the empath because their own emptiness demands reflection. The relationship is the crucible in which both are tested, but the outcome is not determined by fate. It is determined by whether each soul dares to turn inward, to face the shadow, to integrate the archetype. Most do not. Most repeat the cycle endlessly. But for those who dare, the relationship becomes the very fire in which the self is forged. So what happens when the empath no longer saves the narcissist? A new myth is born, the myth of the wounded healer who finally heals themselves, the myth of the Redeemer who steps down from the cross and discovers resurrection within, the myth of the lover who no longer confuses sacrifice with love, but learns to love from wholeness. This myth is not just personal, it is collective, for our age is an age of narcissism, and our culture is full of empaths who burn themselves out trying to save it. When enough empaths refuse, when enough souls turn inward to integrate the shadow, something shifts in the collective psyche. The archetype itself transforms. The culture begins to awaken. Jung's final warning is this: if we do not face the shadow consciously, we will enact it unconsciously on a massive scale. If the empath refuses their descent, they will project the savior archetype outward onto leaders, movements, ideologies. They will seek redemption in politics, in culture, in collective illusions, and the narcissist archetype will rise in response, embodied in figures who devour devotion and mirror the wounds of the collective. This is how entire civilizations are caught in the same dance that binds two individuals. The personal is always also collective. The archetypal drama plays out not only in bedrooms, but in parliaments, in churches, in nations. And so the work of the empath, withdrawing from the narcissist, is not small. It is world-shaking. For in one soul's integration lies the seed of cultural transformation. I tell you, then, the moment you stop saving is the moment you begin living. The moment you face your own shadow is the moment you touch eternity. The narcissist may rage, may collapse, may disappear, but your soul will rise, and when it rises, it carries not only your own healing, but a light for the world. This is not the light of the false savior, the compulsive redeemer. This is the light of the self, steady, radiant, unshaken by shadows. It does not burn out because it burns from within. It does not beg to be seen because it knows itself. And this, my friends, is the end of the archetypal dance. Not the annihilation of empathy, but its transfiguration. Not the destruction of love, but its redemption. So let this be your meditation. Withdraw the projection, face the shadow, embrace the child within. Stop saving the narcissist, and in doing so, save yourself. For in the end, the only salvation we can offer the world is the salvation of our own wholeness. And when enough souls are whole, the archetypes themselves will shift, and the dance of empath and narcissist will no longer bind us in suffering, but teach us the mystery of transformation. This is Jung's warning, but it is also Jung's hope that by facing what is darkest in ourselves, we will awaken what is most divine